What up, Zach?
Hey,
Can't hear you quite yet. Hang tight.
you got me now?
Nope, not yet.
How about now?
Maybe?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. What's up, dude?
What's going on, man?
Good to see you.
So this is fun because they chat or talk to. So I'm gonna get to kind of learn more about you and your companies, kind of like everyone else listening. So I guess we could start with give like an introduction, like who you are, what you do, what area you serve, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived in Nashville for about 16 years. I started our company Diligent about 13 years ago. And we've steadily grown over the course of a little more than 10 years into a multi-inspector company. And now we've actually even branched out just from home inspections into some other sort of adjacent service companies as well to sort of try to make use of all the people that we're meeting and serving and try to maximize everyone's experience and our opportunity for revenue.
Awesome. So what kind of services do you guys offer?
Yeah. So um, I'll to answer that question, I'll tell you a bit of a story. So when I first envisioned Diligent as an idea, I was talking with a friend of mine who was in the home energy and home performance side of the world, and so I think the initial idea was very much that I was going to create this sort of like trifecta, right? Where there was going to be an energy performance component to our company, there was going to be a real estate home inspection piece, and that there was also going to be an environmental piece. And right off the bat, I figured out, oh, wow, this is really hard to try to be good at all three of these areas. Effectively, I'm trying to talk to three different groups of people to help me grow the business. And I'm not super skilled in any of these areas, and I need to be more skilled in at least one. And so um, I was very curious about home energy and home performance. I was learning about that, and I was very curious about the environmental side, but I knew construction better. That's the world I came from. And so I was like, okay, I need to focus on home inspection first, and then the other stuff can come from there. And so I kind of very quickly, almost immediately dialed it back to basically just a home inspection company, but not wholly unlike yourself and many of the guys out there and gals. Um, our clients, our agents end up asking about other services. Oh, what about radon testing? What about termite inspection? What about mold testing or whatever? And so I quickly started realizing, okay, well, there's some other opportunity for kind of accidental revenue, opportunistic revenue, that which comes by way of someone you've already sold. And
Mhm.
so radon testing was the easiest one to add on because of two reasons. One, there wasn't very many people doing it. My clients were already asking about it. And our area was high in radon. And so from there, it was sort of a sequential knocking down of the pins of all the classic services that your sort of larger one-stop shop inspection companies are offering these days. So WDI termite inspections, mold, what we now call mold screening, which is mold testing, and then sewer camera inspection. So that would be like kind of our base level service, home inspection, plus those core four ancillary services would constitute a lot of what our day to day is in the home inspection side. And then, of course, it just kind of flows out from there, right? The home inspection also is going to incorporate everything from structural engineering inspections with our engineer that's on retainer. It's going to be short-term rental inspections for the Airbnb side of the world that's regulated in our neck of the woods. We have a product called a cost outline report, which is a rebrand and a repackaging of some of that AI-driven cost modeling that's out there. And so, yeah, we kind of, I think, by last measurement, we do something like 19 different services under our home inspection, from HUD inspections to all sorts of different things. And we're continuing to look to grow. There is, I think, a growing need for ICC code certified guys out there to be advocates for consumers, to be double checking the other professionals, because there's a lot of funny business in the new construction world and in the repair and renovation side. And so, yeah, we're continuing to stretch out. And I can dive in a little deeper on the other companies when, if you like.
Yeah, so I know you mentioned the Airbnb thing. That's interesting. I have not heard that or even thought of that as like a thing to try to do. So what got you into doing that, or how did you go about getting into something like that?
Yeah, I mean, my first experience with Airbnb was going to one. And my second experience was managing one for my grandmother. Um, and somewhere along the way, someone told me that Nashville, Tennessee, our metro area, was going to start heavily regulating who was allowed to have a permit to run an Airbnb. So, politics aside, there's some funny business around that, but the regulation was going to come with a permitting process and an annually renewable permit. And part of that process was going to be a fire codes inspection. And
Oh,
initially, the fire marshal did it, as you can imagine. Well, the volume of demand, as you can imagine, for these types of permits, people, regular folks wanting to monetize a basement or a carriage house or even their whole house, everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. And so it really came down to the more people wanted it, the more clogged up the fire marshal was getting. And so they said, all right, we're done. We're out. Good. Anytime the public sector gets out of it, that's always good. Fire marshal said, we're out. We're going to kick this over to the home inspectors, the engineers, and the architects. Well, I can tell you right now what the engineer and the architect said. They said, yeah, we're not going out to houses today.
yeah,
That sounds like well beneath us. And
yeah,
I heard about it about a week before. And so I scrambled for a week and built out a process and a report format and sales tools and a pitch and all the rhetoric so that we could immediately start offering this public literally on day one. And that was a handful of years ago. And we've been the largest purveyor of that type service. I think it was told to me by the office downtown that our company does more permitting inspections on that front than every other entity combined.
really, wow. So how
It's
many of those would you guys say you do a year?
we do easily a couple hundred to two to 300 of those a year, which makes me feel a little funny because on one hand, I'm like, yeah, another revenue stream for our company. On the other hand, I'm like, ooh, I think I'm being part of the problem of like helping create all of this saturation of these Airbnbs in town, which is tough because it's big business. You know, a lot of people make money on that, but it's not a huge revenue driver because you can't charge a regular person very much money to walk around their house for 10 minutes and apply three basic factoids of the fire code, you know, smoke alarm placement, in every bedroom, outside of every bedroom, and on every floor, and egress requirements. I mean, it doesn't take much. And so it's been a good thing for us. And we as a company have always been really looking forward to try to like cut new trail and open up new ideas. We were one of the first to do WDI inspections under our umbrella. We were one of the first, if not the first, to do sewer cams in this area, and certainly the first to do this. And I can't say these are new ideas. I borrowed a lot of this stuff from other friends I have in other metropolitan areas. I mean, I had friends doing sewer cam in Philly and in LA long before anyone else. And all I did was basically copy them, you know, kind of a thing. And so people have been copying us locally. And I always take it as one part frustration, one part flattery, right? You know, when someone copies our ideas or our process, because, you know, ideas are not only ours; they're for everybody. And so, this has been a good way for inspectors to get more ingratiated into regular society outside of just real estate transactions.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a big thing what you just said because a lot of guys their only stream of revenue is real estate transactions, and as you know, the market goes up and down, and when it's down, a lot of those guys, they put themselves out of business because that's the only thing that they had going, um, and it's good to kind of branch out like that. So I'm really still curious about that Airbnb thing. Do they regulate the cost on that you charge? Like, are you only allowed to charge a certain amount, or is it just whatever you feel like? Or
The regulation level is really at the consumer side. So they're basically saying within a zip code, there's only allowed to be so many non-owner occupier
Okay.
permits and so many owner occupier permits and so many multifamily permits. And so basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to save the city fabric from being overrun by outside cash investors buying properties, turning them into basically glorified hotels,
Yeah.
and then ruining the city fabric of a neighborhood. And they're right to do so. I don't love regulation pretty much ever, but I live in a city neighborhood and I don't want my city neighborhood that is definitely in striking distance of downtown and would be very attractive to a someone coming in from out of town, a tourist. I don't want my city fabric ruined. So I'm reluctantly sort of in agreement that it should be regulated, but no, they're not regulating anything on our side. You just have to have a licensed inspector perform the inspection. What it's created though is an interesting tension around code adoption and code enforcement and private sector home inspection. Because like most of us in every municipality, the codes people don't want us private sector home inspectors anywhere near their side of the fence. And we don't want them really on our side of the fence. And, never the two shall mix, right? However, us having to go out and basically interpret the 2018 fire code, to the letter of the law with all of the gray areas that may exist in reality has been interesting because the initial regulation was not super defined on what a consumer needed to do to make their home compliant. And so what the initial law was relying upon was the fire marshal to call the ball. But when the fire marshal kicked the ball to the private sector, now we had to become interpreters of code. Now you may know this, but municipal employees who enforce the code are never liable for errors that they make.
Yep.
They are indemnified from saying this is code compliant when in reality it's not. Totally across the board, every municipal employee. Private sector employees are not employees. Private sector people like us are not. If we make an error, someone can be like, "Oh, I'm gonna sue your pants off,"
Yep.
kind of thing. And so, application of the fire code was a sticky wicket for a minute because it was a lot of phone calls from me and my service manager to the fire marshal's office, and they never would pick up because #government. And then sternly worded emails from me quoting chapter and verse out of the 2018 fire code and saying, we are going to take these words to mean X and we are going to apply it in this manner. And you need to respond to my email if you would like for me to do anything besides this, because I'm doing it, And so they finally fleshed it out and gave more illumination. But, I think there were probably some other individuals like us that were having some of the same trouble. And it was that pressure that helped illuminate the needs for interpreting, well, what is the application of fire code around egress requirements mean on a 60-year-old ranch home where the sill is above 44 inches or the window is in 5.7 square feet of egress space? Like, how do we deal with that? What's the spirit of it? Is it about a fireman coming in from outside, or is it about a old lady trying to escape out of her window? I had people saying, oh, it's not the right number of inches to the sill height. Well, we'll just build a little step right in front of our window. So now you have a weird step. So now does the step have... Oh, are we losing for a second?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay. Does the step need to be 7 3/8 inches tall with an 11th inch run? Rise and run requirements are also on a one step in front of... I don't know. It's kind of funky. And so it was a good reminder, and for all of your listeners here, that the model code, the International Residential Code, is very wrongly and very intentionally meant to be a single model code for the whole national sort of landscape, and it can't be. There's too many variations. There's too many climate variations. There's too many common building practice variations. There's too many peculiarities in older housing stock. It's very complex to try to create a single code requirement for everyone in every house.
Yeah, and something you mentioned was like interpretation, because that's key. I mean, every inspector is going to interpret it differently, as well as like a builder. And so that can kind of mess things up when you've got 10 different companies doing these inspections, and one company's looking at things one way and another company's looking at it another way. So,
Yeah. So this is
yeah, that's
actually, this is really relevant to our business as home inspectors. And interestingly enough, it intersects like the legal world. Because when you write a law, there is somebody, this wasn't written by a computer, there's somebody that wrote it. And the words they use, they're usually the person who writes the law is trying to make it as clear as possible, right? So it can be clearly interpreted. However, that's not always the case. It's not always clear in which to interpret. And so there's what's called legal intent, meaning, well, what did they intend, or legislative intent, even? Like, what did they intend for this rule or this law to be? Well, the same thing is true about our standards of practice and the function of our business and what is normal for a home inspector to do. Like, someone wrote the standard. Someone was the first person to do X, and now we all do the same thing. Like, what was the intent behind it? Because the interpretation of what our standards of practice is, or what a law or a governmental bill is all about, always has to intersect with legislative intent, legal intent, or the writer's intent. And so, yeah, it's very complex, because I see, and I've been hearing for years, home inspectors be like, oh, well, I just need to write it up, because that's what the standards of practice says. I don't need to like go chase it down or figure it out. And it's like, well, what was the intent of that standards of practice written component? Like, what was the goal for the client in writing this to be the standards of practice? So I think inspectors need to be very aware that we are in a complex world and very adjacent to a complex world, and any attempt that we can to simplify our job almost certainly gets us off track rather than on track.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. And, knowing what you're writing up is key when you're a home inspector too, and like knowing why, like the reasoning. I'll give you an example here of interpretation. So I had a new construction house on Monday. And with new construction house, if I know the area and I know what code they're using, I'll try to kind of follow that. And they had the gas line secured to ductwork on the HVAC. And I try to find the code for homeowners so that if the builder pushes back, they have something to show them. And I was reading the code on that, and there's nothing that specifically says it can't be attached to ductwork, but there's something that says that it can't be attached to something that's going to cause vibration or movement of the line. And ductwork moves. I don't know. I'm sure you've been in a house where it kicks on and the ductwork like expands out. So my interpretation is that's something that moves, and that gas line needs to be moved. But what was the city inspector thinking when he saw it and didn't say anything? And what's the HVAC guy thinking when he installed it that way? So that's just one of those things where interpretation is pretty important. And, we all kind of see things differently or have different interpretations of things. So
Yeah. I think the language I've seen sometimes used is secure attachment or securely attached. So then we have to go back and define what the word securely means. Like, does securely means we're attached to something that's movable or immovable, right? Like, yeah. This is the kind of thoughtfulness I want to see in the guys that work with me at my company. This is the kind of thoughtfulness I want to see out of my competitors and really any home inspector. I think it's easy, especially as home inspectors, to look at our brothers in the trades who are doing the work and be like, oh, they're not doing good enough. They're taking the lowest, worst common denominator route to do X, Y, or Z. Home inspectors do the same thing, because so many of us are technical guys coming out of the trades. We're still taking some of those bad mindsets of like, oh, we'll just do kind of whatever works in the moment, and we'll employ that in our business. Whereas we really need to probably employ more of an engineer's mindset, a lot of the time. Well, these are the rules. I can try to work within the rules. I can find some flexibility in the rules, but these are the rules, and the danger for the home inspectors that are successful in that mindset is they can sometimes feel like they're talking over folks, or a little aloof, or maybe talking down, to people. Well, this is how it is, and it's how it's always been done, or whatever. And so it's a tightrope we got to walk between being very sensitive and open-minded to the custom nature of the world and people's custom questions, but also the rigid nature of building science and building code that, just because it's common that no one puts a footing in their deck post doesn't mean it's any less wrong, kind of a thing. So, yes, we probably all should have done something different because this is very difficult business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like going back to what you said there about like I feel like inspectors, they write their opinions too much in the report. Like something may not be code, but like their opinion, it's dangerous when not in everybody's opinion it is dangerous. And a good example is like a trip concern on like your sidewalk. Let's say there's a sidewalk has settled a little bit. At what point of like that sidewalk, like how much is considered a trip concern? There's no definition. There's no like at 1/2 inch it is a trip concern. At 1/4 inch it is not. So I feel like a lot of times we're putting our opinions in things, but I agree with you in that we need to take more of an engineer's mindset with stuff, and it's like these are the rules, and then we need to I guess I don't want to say enforce because we can't enforce anything. We just kind of offer our suggestions, but kind of stick to that, And with new construction, it tends to be a little more difficult because people are building a new house. They're a lot more pickier. Like 98, 99% of my business is new construction. I do new construction and warranty inspections.
Wow.
And so I have to really stay up on what each city is doing and because as you know, cities have the ability to amend things in code. So they might enforce certain things. Like I know around me that they don't enforce ceiling ductwork. That's not a requirement. They amended that. And so you got to kind of stay on top of that. But what I was getting back to with the new construction is you get people that are a lot more pickier because they're building a new house. And so they may feel like the floor is sloping and they want that fixed. They want like a perfectly flat floor. Whereas you got to kind of take a look at, okay, what are the allowances for floor slope? And then you got to let them know like, hey, it is sloping, but there's a tolerance, and you're not going to get a perfectly flat floor all the time. There's variables. You got, they could have crowned a joist the wrong way. I mean, the joist could have kind of warped a little bit. The subfloor could have got wet and warped a little bit. So just stuff like that. There's fine lines that we've got to, like you said, fine lines we got to walk, and it's tough. It's a tough gig. That's for sure.
Yeah. In some respects, because so much of our business is, by contrast, existing homes and infrastructure, we actually love when the new construction ones come along because we do tend to be pretty aggressive on the technical front, both in depth of knowledge and in breadth of knowledge. And so when we have a primary source in which to refer back to, the code, the IRC, we really like that because on an older home, if you call something is wrong, you have to give a balanced defense versus what was relevant during that era versus what is life and safety, relevant now. And you can't apply new codes to old houses. And so I tend to find a tiny breath of fresh air when we get a new construction house because we can be like, oh, bro, you got the code. You got the benefit of building to the code right now. Like, oh, you didn't do this correctly? Boom. Let me point to it for you. And we don't quote chapter and verse in our reports because that's bad juju. But, we kind of do this, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's more definitive for you. You got something to kind of fall back on.
Yes. Look. Yes. And which has led me to areas of the modern residential code that I don't agree with. And I've had to tell people, hey, I'm actually recommending X, even though this does currently meet code requirement. The classics for me, because I spend a lot of time dealing in the environmental and moisture dynamics side of the world, is crawl spaces. In our part of the country, we have a lot of crawl spaces. Crawl spaces pretty much suck most of the time, especially if you're in a mixed humid climate like us. And code allowances for crawl spaces in IRC 408, is insufficient really to deal with the varying problems that we have. Ventilated crawl spaces pretty much don't work like 90% of the time in our area. But as you may well know, 408.1, 408.2 is all about ventilated crawl spaces. And so, people are like, well, hey, it meets code. It's ventilated. It's like, and it will suffer, accordingly. There will be problems down here long term, but the builder doesn't care. They're out. They're gone. They're not on the hook, and so the code falls short, in a number of areas. It's not just the standard by which we reach. It's actually, and this is from a friend of mine in the industry, the code built house, the house built to code, is actually the worst house that you're legally allowed to build.
Yeah.
You can build a better house, but you can't build a worse house. So don't think this is like you're getting pats on the back and stars on your chest. This is like, congratulations, you barely passed middle school, kind of thing.
I tell clients all the time. I say this builder builds like it's the equivalent of getting a D on in school. Like, would you want your kid coming home with D's across the board? Probably not. So, but yeah, I agree. So I started home inspections in Illinois because I'm right on the river there. I'm in Missouri, and so I ran into a lot of spaces in Illinois, and I'll tell you, there's maybe I could fit on like one hand the amount that were done properly, and so I've kind of became accustomed to recommending people just fully encapsulate, don't vent them, put a dehumidifier down there, or some kind of I've seen ducts down there. Like once they fully encapsulate, they'll put lighting down there and they'll put a couple ducts down there to to keep it kind of room temperature. Basically, create I don't want to say a living space, but a conditioned space. So I'm not sure what you guys recommend, but that's pretty much the only way I see a crawl space in good condition is it's fully encapsulated.
Yeah. We see so many crawl spaces that we kind of see a little bit of all of it. I remember going to a national inspectors conference at one point in time, and a guy was talking. I think he lived in like Arizona or something like that. And he was like, "Oh yeah, it's all slab on grade here for us. I probably see crawl spaces, once every 1 or 200 houses." And I was like, I think we don't see a crawl space every 1 or 200 houses. Like, my goodness, that must be nice. But yeah, we see a little bit of all of it. The ones that do the encapsulation work, crawl space management work, about half get it right, half get it wrong. The vast majority of new homes and older homes are ventilated spaces. About 3/4 of them to 80% of them are struggling with moisture, termites, mold, or all of the above. And long-term, extreme moisture environments lead to greater deflection in your structural members, lead to accumulation of pests, both the furry kind and the insectoid kind, and just generally don't bode well for the house. We wouldn't let any part of our house just have exposed regular wood to the outdoors. We paint it, or we put roof covering over it, or vinyl, or whatever. But then we leave the structure of our home, which is not pressure treated, it is regular wood. We leave that exposed to the wicking of moisture out of the soil, within 2 to 4 feet. Now this isn't a big deal in like the West where there's no humidity, or like the Great Plains, but over here on the Eastern Seaboard or in the Deep South, kind of where we are, like, yeah, this is bad juju.
Yeah. It's moisture will ruin a crawl space. And when you were saying you get the little furry animals, but those you get the reptilian ones too. And I'm sure you've probably seen snakes or snake skins in crawl spaces, and that's always I don't like snakes, and that whenever I see that, I'm just like so hesitant to go in there. But yeah.
I myself love snakes. However, I find myself very confused when we see the snake skin up at the rim level. I'm like, we got 4 or 5 block here. You don't have the arms and legs. How the heck did you get up there? Like, yeah, the big snake skins at the rim really freak you out for that vision of like, I think a snake might fall on my head right now, and that sounds terrible. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, definitely.
Have you? I'm sure you've run across where they put insulation between the joists in the crawl space. They got plastic on the floor.
Yeah.
I'm scared of a snake coming out because it could be up in there looking for mice that are in insulation or
Oh
whatever.
yeah. Yeah, we have our fair share of possums down here too, and I'll never forget one of my guys. We wear the crawl space suit, we put the mask on, we have these little like telescoping beating sticks to like get rid of the cobwebs, whatever. And so my guy's in there. It's a smaller crawl space. He's crawling, and it tires you out pretty quick. As you know, all of us are prone to have laid on our backs and just taken a breather, in there, especially on a hot summer day. And so he's kind of laying there, kind of looking up at the joists and everything, and then he feels the thing that he's laying on start to move,
Oh man.
and he kind of gets some perspective on it, and it's like kind of moving towards him under the vapor barrier. And so he's like beating it with his, beating stick. And it turns out it was an opossum who was very surprised to have been disturbed under there. But yeah, all sorts of little critters under there, especially the dead kind too.
Oh yeah. Yep. I'm running those dead cats. So? Let me ask you this: what's the craziest thing you've seen in a crawl space, or the funniest thing?
Um, I have encountered some really bad black water sewage pooling in crawl spaces of like perfectly normal homes that people had no idea, and the drain flies, and I mean, you got to take that kind of stuff pretty serious, because that black water level of exposure is really prone to some gnarly, bacteria and stuff like that. That's been pretty wild. Definitely going into like, you're not even in the crawl space, you're just looking through the door, and the entire crawl space is a pool.
Yeah.
There's a depression, and there's been an accumulation of water, and it can't drain out. That's pretty wild. People saying, "What? Why don't you just kind of like tiptoe through it?" I'm like, "Come on, man! Like there could be an energized wire, like you touch that pool, boom, zapper, you know." But yeah, I'm always curious about the crawl spaces where you go in and it's like, oh, it's a little crawl space, and then you go a little bit more and there's like a whole open area, and you're like, "There's like an entire weird secret room down here. What's going on?" Kind of thing. And maybe there was like a basement at one point in time. I don't know, but yeah.
There's a lot of ones around us that they just dig around where like the plumbing was ran. So it's like you basically can't even go anywhere. You're like scooting on your belly because you have like this much space. But I've seen the doo doo in there before, and I was like stopped there, backed out. I'm like, I'm not going any further. I'm not walking that.
Yeah.
I've seen a toilet in a crawl space. I guess during a bathroom remodel, instead of carry the toilet out, they just dropped it down below and left it there.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask you how many guys you got working for you right now?
We have 7 home inspectors, and then some ancillary guys that serve in a couple different capacities. The ancillary guys will transition between our different companies, our environmental company, our radon mitigation company, and then support some of the ancillary services in our home inspection company. And then we have a pest control company too. And so we have folks working on that side. And then we have some folks in the office that handle operations and admin and scheduling and sales. And then we have a marketing team that helps us look good, like today.
Nice. So you got for you then. You got a pretty big system going on. It sounds like.
Yeah, we experienced a lot of growth from like 18 to 21. The pandemic was like a supercharge for us, and we actually grew even much bigger than we are by 21. And then I don't know how it is in your area or other folks, but like 22 and 23 were painful shrinking of the market years. And that's a truism as a multi-inspector company that a lot of guys don't talk about or don't know. And that is, if your business is well diversified as a solo operator, the ebbs and flows of the market will affect you, but proportionately less. If you are a larger multi-inspector company, it doesn't really matter how well you're diversified. I mean, maybe if you're like extremely diversified, but if you're a bigger company like ours, market growth and shrinking is going to drastically affect you. And so we had a lot of market growth in our area from 18 to 21. And so those were big years, for us. And so we shrunk pretty intensely for like 24 months straight. Yeah, I mean, from 2011, 12, when I started through 21, we're basically in the black, banner month over month, year over year, just great months and great quarters and great years, just kind of over and over and over. And I started to think, oh man, I'm freaking great at this. When in reality, I'm only regular good at doing this. And the market was a growth market in my area. And there was just a lot more demand than there was supply of the type of product that I'm offering, which is a well polished, comprehensive inspection product. And so there had been inspectors in this area for, decades, but what we had basically started offering in 12 and 13 and 14, the market was just very hungry for, and the market was growing. And so really from 12 to 21, we couldn't almost keep up with demand. And so I just was hiring, training. And so some of the growth was good. Some of it was not good. And so what we had done well, we were able to build upon and retain, and what we had not done well, we sort of shrunk. And that's a better lesson in market dynamics and business than any school course could have given me. And it was so painful.
Yeah. Yeah. 22, I think, is when it started getting slow for me. I'd say, yeah, 22. And then just because December of 22, so I started in November of 2016. So it was just kind of like how you were saying, year over year, month over month, I kept gradually getting better. And then 22 is when it kind of hit a stalemate and then started going down. December of 22, I had 2 inspections that entire month, and I'm used to doing anywhere from, I'd say 16 to 20, sometimes more if I feel like taking a larger workload. But yeah, so 2 inspections, and then January I ended up going. I got a job at FedEx loading trailers, packages at night from like 6 to 10, and then started working for a buddy's construction company, framing houses. And luckily, I only had to do that stuff for a month, and then this whole construction inspection stuff took off, and so I was able to basically all of 23, 24, and then so far this year, just keep booking inspections week after week with new construction stuff. I've kind of was lucky enough to get into it, and then word of mouth snowballed, and it kind of just turned into now my company is essentially just a new construction and warranty inspection company.
So interesting.
Yeah, I consider it myself blessed for that because I've seen guys quit, take other jobs. In my area, I know on the Illinois side, 5 different guys have either just decided to retire because it's been so slow, or they went working somewhere else. And I know because Missouri's not a licensed state, but I still hold my license in Illinois. And I think there were 600 less renewals. I want to say it was 5 or 600 less renewals uh, this cycle versus the previous in 2024 or 2022. I think, yeah, 2022. So yeah, it's I consider myself lucky that I got into that because I'd probably be out of business doing something else if that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the new construction side is really interesting to build a business around. There's a number of home inspectors that actually do that where they book out like a lot, kind of a thing.
Yep.
And that kind of security and that niche service is really attractive. It's really hard for me to build a brand around that because you're subject to builder and development dynamics that are outside of your control and are based on some pretty big economic factors. And that's been another lesson that I'm learning about what can I control to affect my business positively and what can I not control? Because in some respects, especially last year or maybe 23, I feel like I was at a place where I was like, I feel like I'm kind of doing everything that I need to be doing to be growing, and we're not growing, and, you know, 23, 22 and 23 were hard years. The buyer demand had shrunk. The interest rates were up. People were wanting to see what happened with the next election. There's a lot of people on the sidelines. And so, yeah, there's a lot to market dynamics, and probably almost a no truer area is new construction. So I applaud you for being able to carve out a niche that just shows your particular talent and abilities in that area, because it's an almost more volatile area in some respects than even regular home inspections.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like I'm in an area that I'm lucky enough that where we've got some pretty large companies that have been hiring a lot of people, and so there's been a lot of people moving here from out of state, and there's no houses on the market to buy, so they're just building. Lots of new neighborhoods going up. The one thing that you mentioned, kind of, that I do want to touch on is like, I'm kind of at the mercy of builders in a lot of situations, and there's one builder particular that's who I started doing all these inspections for, and they kind of got tired of me, and so they started making these different requirements. So like they made a requirement for I had to get workman's comp on myself, $1 million auto liability policy. I met the requirements for general liability and but a lot of guys around here didn't. So I was in this situation where I was the only one meeting their requirements. And I decided to drop the workman's comp and then not do the auto liability because they implemented another rule where the people had to inform them they were getting a pre-drywall at least 2 weeks before the pre-drywall date. Well, nobody knew when their pre-drywall date was going to be. They'd forget and they wouldn't inform them, and so they wouldn't be able to schedule it. And so the amount of pre-drywall inspections I was doing for this particular builder dropped off a ton, and it just wasn't worth it, me paying the amount monthly to keep up with it just to meet their needs. But there's probably 4 other builders that are building lots of homes that they don't have any requirements. They just let me come in and do what I need to do and then head out. So until they change their minds, I at least got a little bit of business still going with that.
Yeah, I to touch more deeply on this particular subject, I have seen over the past 6-7 years a very pronounced increase in developers, builder brands creating roadblocks, very specific roadblocks for the home inspection, pre-purchase home inspection traditional phase, or the pre-drywall phase. We're seeing some of the same things in our area. For a little while, there was a builder who raised the number of requirements that they had to have for anyone to come on site so high that no one wanted to do it. I didn't want to do it. And then I was like, okay, I can put the effort in. I'll do it. So we were one of the only companies that did for a while. And now I think there's a few people. But I mean, I've seen like what you're talking about, insurance requirements that are cost prohibitive for small operators. Workman's comp based confusion. You have to have it, but at least in the state of Tennessee, you could be exempt if you're a solo operator. So there's a bit of a crisscross requirement there. Like you have to have it, but you don't have to, kind of thing. I've seen papers that they make the clients, the home buyers sign. If you get a pre-purchase inspection, they can't go on the roof. They can't open the electrical panel. They can't walk on the floors without booties, or stupid stuff, like stuff where it's like, okay, let me try to envision this from the mind of a process builder who's trying to make their job most efficient, like on the up and up. And I'm like, okay, I guess it helps them a little bit, but it kind of doesn't make a ton of sense. So I guess the reason is you don't want someone calling you on the carpet. And honestly, if we were finding a relatively small amount of things, trivial, mildly inconsequential matters, I guess I'd get it. Oh, the home inspectors are throwing a wrench in our system and it doesn't make any sense because we're basically doing everything right. Yeah, but that's not true. They're doing a lot of stuff wrong, like a lot of big stuff wrong. So it just seems unscrupulous.
Yeah, yeah. That builder I was talking about, the pre-drywall requirements, they got rid of me on the final inspection by, like you said, won't allow me in the attic, won't allow me on the roof, won't let me take the electrical panel cover off, and they won't let me in there once carpet's installed. And so I went to a house to do an inspection right before they were installing carpet, and I found that they don't even have utilities on at that point. So there were no receptacles in the walls, there were no lights, there was no plumbing on. Um, so I'm basically doing a pre-drywall inspection with the drywall in at that point. And so I was like, well, this is pointless. So I started having to tell people, it's pointless to have me come for a final. Just have me come before your 1 month or before your 1 year warranty. And that's kind of how it turned into, doing a lot of warranty inspections. But yeah, it's a shame some of the wrenches they throw in the mix to deter inspectors from being able to look at it, just so that they can not be interrupted and get their house sold. And
Yeah, and guys who are out there in the inspection industry need to be aware that the warranty inspection is great. It's a solid, service for us. It's great revenue. However, be aware that the developers are starting to employ third-party warranty managers who are not the same company or the same people as the developer. And just like an insurance company's entire goal is to not pay you because that's how they make their money, the entire goal of the warranty manager is to not do anything. And it sounds made up. It sounds like a big bad boogie monster sort of thing, but it's true. These warranty managers tie you up in extra time and unnecessarily long email communication and scheduling snafus, and they trivialize what they do and do not have to do strictly because their worth and ability to land that contract for the developer is based on how much they actually make the developer come back and fix. And so it's tough. I feel like it's kind of a screwed if you do and screwed if you don't situation, because if you don't get them to fix it before you close, it just feels like a really difficult situation to get them to fix it after you close. I have only heard about this really being fixed at the state level when it comes to liability borne upon a builder or developer and what their statute of limitations is, or their total like a liability that can be borne upon them. Like, for example, I have a friend in Iowa who builders have a 10-year, statute of limitations on the liability for bad building practices. Here in Tennessee, they say it's 1 year. It's technically 4, but the effort you have to go through to pin it on a builder it's very difficult.
do you think do you think it's just state people in the government and the state haven't implemented or haven't looked at this to say, hey, this is kind of a low, we need to raise this? Or do you think they're purposely keeping it low to attract more builders? Do you think that even matters in a builder's eye? Like, hey, this state has lower statute of limitations, let's go build a bunch of houses there.
It 100% matters. If I was a national builder and Kentucky was an unfavorable environment to me because I was going to be held to every home I constructed for 10 years. I don't know what Kentucky is, but get the idea. And then Tennessee, I could probably get out from most of it after a year or a couple years. Like, I'm going to build in Tennessee. Yeah, definitely. So I think it definitely matters. And you got to be aware that the Home Builders Association, the HBA, the political lobby at the state level and the national level is massive, massive. And so they are definitely working the legislators over at the state level to create environments that are favorable for builders and unfavorable for consumers. Like, that's the story that's going on in the national stage as well, of course. But like, that's real. That's something that intersects us. We had the energy code finally get upgraded to the 2018 energy code after we were lagging behind for years and years and years. And then the legislators just gutted it back to 2006. And
Jeez.
so now the builders that had slowly, barely started getting their insulation and duct sealing and whole home sealing requirements figured out so they could pass blower door tests in our area, like, boom, it's gone. They don't have to do it anymore. All of my buddies who are HERS raters and home performance guys, they're all having to figure something else out now because they were already kind of not doing a great job at doing it, the builders. Well, now they don't have to do it at all, And so, yeah, it's really tough. That favorable, unfavorable environment thing is well out of our control. And there's a lot of people stacking the deck against us on that.
Yeah, it seems like all that stuff always leads to who's got the most money. And, obviously, home builders are going to have more than the consumer. So,
and more than the home inspectors. There's no home inspector lobby because ultimately our industry is a thin margin industry by comparison,
Yeah, we're bottom. Definitely totem pole. That's
yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah, the real estate lobby and the home builders lobby is pretty big, and so they affect a lot of policy change.
Well, a good example is that in Maine, that the electrician union, IBW, lobbied and got to where inspectors can't take off electrical panels and like the dead. So in order to have the electrical panel inspected on the inside, the home buyer now has to hire an electrician to come in because only electricians now are allowed to take the cover off the panel. So,
well, there is a business opportunity. If I ever heard one, I would get my electrical license in Maine, and then I would offer a panel removal service to every home inspector I could find for a cool, easy $75. I'll drive to your house and pull the panel off for you.
Yep, that's exactly what because a licensed electrician's not going to go out for anything less than probably 125, 150. You can just go get your I don't know how hard it is, but go get your electrician's license, and then just start doing that's an ancillary service essentially now.
Yeah, so this brings up an interesting subject around what the world perceives home inspectors as versus what I think a home inspector could be or what our industry could be. So that example about the electricians, and there's one in Texas about sewer cam and plumbers. It's the same sort of thing. Home inspectors in Texas couldn't do sewer cam because they weren't plumbers, and then maybe they can now. I don't really know how it works. But home inspectors are actually extremely qualified to probably put the work in and become the plumber in Texas or the electrician in Maine or whatever red tape there is to become whatever people think you need to become. I mean, who else better to do that than a person who's knowledgeable about the whole home environment? So I think that whoever's doing these lobbies or these control efforts fail to realize that at least some portion of home inspectors are extremely well poised to become whatever you're trying to keep them from becoming. Now, some guys will just be like, I'm not going to do it. But we're seeing some of the same stuff around ICC required. So there's a new law in Tennessee around codes inspections can now take place with private sector company who's ICC certified. Generally, this is a terrible idea, but it did happen. And so now we have to figure it out. And so some people are like, oh, the home inspectors can't be part of that. We really need the architects, or independent codes officials, whoever those people are, to be doing this work. And it's like, well, at least some portion of the home inspectors who are like knowledgeable, capable, and experienced should just go ahead and get their ICC certification and then employ services in this area. So that's what I want for all of my home inspector friends across the country is think of yourself as the most qualified individual to go as deep as you want to go. Don't think of yourself as like having this little, license or company or job or whatever that you're limited to do anything else. Like there's no better generalist. There's no better pre-building scientist. And a lot of my classes that I teach on, I talk about home inspectors are the most well-poised to become building scientists more than anyone else, more than builders, more than anyone. And so we have just but to go a little farther into those areas of depth to provide those layers of service. And so yeah, whatever the thing is in your state or your area, go after the extra stuff, the electrical license or the ICC certification, to prove out that you are maybe the best in your area, but also that you can fulfill any of those needed roles for your consumer. Who better is the consumer advocate than the home inspector, the truly impartial third party?
Yeah, no, I agree. I've always said I think anyone who's going to get into any trade should go through a home inspection course, to kind of get a general knowledge of how what they're going to be doing is going to affect the rest of the house, whether that's HVAC, plumbing, whatever. Because a lot of these guys, if they take a roofer for example, that's all they know. They don't know anything else, and they don't know how anything else gets affected in the house when they're doing a roof, like ventilation. I know a lot of these companies, they just throw shingles on a roof and that's it. They don't really take into account the types of ventilation, what works best. Because one of these builders in my area, they're doing all gable soffit. That's their venting. They don't have any. There's no ridge vent. It's just gable soffit. And in my opinion, that's like, it just takes a couple seconds of thinking. Like, gable is meant for like a crosswind, left to right, or however you want to figure it. But it's meant for air to come in one side of the house through the gable, go through the other side of the house through the gable. Soffit is in place with the idea that you're going to have some kind of up high roof vent where the air will get in and there'll be a stack effect and it'll go up through that upper vent, which, ridge vent, turtle vents, whatever you want, those box vents, whatever you want to do. But when you have a crosswind ventilation and a soffit, that air is just kind of combobulated in there. It's not really flowing. There's no stack effect. It's not doing what you want it to do. Uh, so,
Here's a little piece of trivia for you. You want to know why gable vents exist at all? Gable vents come from a time where we did not understand science as good as we understand it now, and we didn't understand building science and construction techniques as good as we do now, right? Like, a gable vent was from a time where we didn't fully understand stack effect the way that we do now, and that hot air rises and creates these positives and negative pressures. And it was at a time where we were very uncomfortable with cutting holes in our roof, and we were very much more comfortable to cut a hole in the side of our house adjacent to the roof. And so a gable vent can literally be defined as an old world idea of venting. I would even argue that in modern construction, there is no building science based reason for a gable vent because it is infinitely inferior than every other means of venting. We used to not really vent our soffits because we didn't understand the idea of like, oh, inlet, and then, oh, it's escape. Like, we were just like, let's bring air in. The truth is that what you just mentioned about crosswind and cross ventilation is actually an old idea that's been parroted for a long time. And it's actually not entirely true either, because it was based on the assumption that wind was always going to do what we thought it was going to do, and we are much better at understanding now that, like, except for a few places, wind's not going to always go one direction. And based on windows and doors being open and how we live in our homes, there's going to be pressures inside of our building envelope that are going to create reasons why air comes in or escapes. And so sometimes, depending on the wind, if it's a lateral shear force of wind, you're actually not going to get any in ventilation or exhaust ventilation at a gable vent. You're actually going to get a back and forth, because it's going to create a slight negative pressure and pull air out, and then it's going to create a slight positive pressure and pull it back in. And so, yeah, I also see this what we call confused ventilation strategies in this area, where they fail to do that. And now that we have all these like fancy plastic, ridge vent things now that are well established, there's really no reason why we shouldn't be doing soffit and ridge pretty much every time. I don't personally see a lot of benefit in the standard vents or the whirlybirds, the turbines. And depending on the structure, I don't really love powered vents either. But generally speaking, a soffit and ridge system, if it's well installed and if the attic is well insulated, should be more than sufficient to bring the attic to an appropriate temperature to avoid other problems.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to like the gable vent too, is like that idea of cross ventilation only works as well as if you've got wind, and if you're in the Midwest, you know what I'm saying. Like in the summertime, we don't have wind; it's just stale, hot, humid air. And yeah, it's I just wish I call it out every time I inspect the house. I call it out and I tell people to turn that in just to kind of nibble at them so that every house I inspect, they're getting hit with somebody wanting their ventilation fixed. But um, the thing is with these builders is they don't go back to the house in 10 years or in 20 years, so they're not seeing what we're seeing, which is the adverse effects of not ventilating a roof properly. You get, you've seen it. You go in there, the sheathing's discolored, the nails are rusted, um, stuff like that, which that also has to do with air leakage and not properly being insulated and stuff like that. But a lot of that has to do with ventilation too. So um, yeah, that's one of those things that I like to complain about is these builders doing that soffit gable. That just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah, it's tough. I I find that we have a tough run at it when we're trying to help improve industry practice. Um, but things are functioning. They might be wrongly installed, but functioning. Um, there's a set of terms that I talk about a lot. This idea of a defect versus an upgrade, and a lot of clients will be like, "Well, hey, why are you not writing this up? Whatever it is, X, Y, or Z." And I'll say, "Well, that's not a defect; it's an upgrade." And a quick summary of what that is like a defect is something that's wrong because it's not functioning in the way that it was originally intended to function. And an upgrade is the item that you're asking for is an improvement in that scenario, but it's still technically functioning correctly. So, for example, the classic one is your water heater, right? Your old water heater that's not leaking and it's still working.
Yeah,
But it's 18 years old, and you're like, I need you to fix this. It's like, well, it's an upgrade, not a defect, but I'll scour the surface looking for rust so we can call out a leak and call that a defect. But um, so we definitely scrutinize those aging elements, roofs, water heaters, HVAC, whatever, looking for things that would give cause to call it a defect versus an upgrade. But it's a bigger problem because like what you're talking about, this ventilation strategy, or what we were mentioning earlier with the crawl space ventilation problems, these are old building practices, tried and true, decades long, time honored. Entire labor force knows how to do it this one way versus this other way. And trying to change that when people are pointing to, hey, it's working fine, which is half true. Half the homes with the bad thing are working fine.
yeah,
Half the homes aren't. The people who are usually saying it's fine, most of them aren't going back to the homes. Who else is going to older homes on a regular basis besides home inspectors? If you're maybe pest control people, but like even if you're a service professional, you don't usually go back to the same home very often, if at all. And so who's going back to the homes? You're right. Builders, most specifically, are not going back to the homes. And we, home inspectors, are seeing more and more, oh, if you do this thing wrong at the time of new construction, nothing happens for 5 years. But then from year 6 through 15, you have a ton of problems, kind of a thing. And so no one's really talking about that. The classic in my area is the adhered stone veneer. That's the stucco-like applied veneer that has all the stones in it that looks like, oh, this is like an anchored veneer application like brick. But no, it's not. It's applied like stucco. And the builder's like, well, it's fine. Literally, I had a builder yesterday tell me, I've been building 200 homes a year for the last, 30 years. And we've never had a problem with missing flashing above a window, in a veneer application. I'm like, well, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I can point to the code in IRC 703.1 where you're 100% wrong. And you've been doing it for how many hundreds of times wrong? Like, don't come at me with experience when I'm holding the code in my hand, kind of a thing. And so changing the building practice in your area is so hard. I mean, this is why the collectivism of the inspector community is so necessary. And unfortunately, it's really absent. You know, a lot of guys, myself included early in my career, I didn't want to talk to anyone. There's a lot of guys that don't want to talk to you. You want to talk to your competition. You're worried about losing your business to them. You know, you think everybody's an idiot, and then later you come to realize everybody's a nice guy, you know, kind of a thing. And so it's very difficult. We've got to do better at getting on the same page so that you can put a dozen voices, 3 dozen voices to say, hey, this is a problem in our area. You guys have got to solve this. You can't be just not putting drip edge flashing on your roofs, which is a widely popular way to install a roof in our neck of the woods. And I'm like, drip edge flashing has been in the code for like 4 or 5 cycles or more. Like, how do we get to the point where the builders aren't doing it and the codes officials are just like letting it go?
Right. Yeah.
It's very odd.
No, I 100% agree. The thing in my area is the building inspectors are allowing this fascia that's got a lip on it, but it doesn't go underneath, or it doesn't go in underneath the underlayment. So it's basically just an aluminum fascia that's got a lip on the that comes outward but not inward. And if you look at the definition of drip edge flashing, it has to extend under the shingles. I think it's like an inch minimum. So that's not even considered flashing. So they're essentially they're just getting away with not putting a drip edge flashing, which is required on the roofs. But there's a lot of stuff like that. Multi-wire branch circuits on tandem breakers, and they don't have them tied together. That's a huge issue I've been running into. And St. Louis County, luckily, has finally started making builders put those ties, handle ties, on there. But yeah, it's frustrating at times, and it takes a lot of work to get them to finally change, because we like I said before, we have no pull, we have no authority, so all we can do is just be like Cy and get a huge following on social media, and then you know try to change everybody's minds on things, so
But
or expose things.
certain individuals like that tend to use the shock and awe, which does well for followers and only does moderately well for education, because education in its truest form is always constructive criticism and solutions giving. And so it's really easy to sling arrows, right, and mud, and it's much harder to come up with better methods. I would like to see more connection between the private sector home inspectors and the public sector codes officials.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be really nice to be like, hey, y'all, why are you not doing this? You know, can you give us your reasoning? Maybe you actually have a good reason and we can kind of fall in line behind it. Or maybe we can highlight an area that you are omitting in your process, and, you know, maybe we can help improve it. I think, unfortunately, the reality is the codes process has never had a lot of scrutiny on application of the code, or you might say enforcement and interpretation of the code. And so I know there's an organization that runs these guys. I know they do education work. You know, they have continuing ed. So why is there an allowance for codes officials to basically be doing 5-minute inspections, 10-minute inspections? You know, like, why would both of us be able and willing to view and judge the built environment, but one of us takes 3 hours to do it and one of us takes 5 or 10 minutes to do it? I don't understand. You know, I don't understand why it's allowed to not go into crawl space to look at crawl space insulation, you know, insulation requirements. Like, there's just, I think, a lot more need to connect, and it's wildly separate, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, I've talked to some code guys, because I'll email them, questions why they aren't doing certain things, and the most common answer I get is they have too much to look at, too many houses to look at, and not enough time. And I think that's kind of why they're only spending 5 or 10 minutes at a place. And essentially, it all just comes down to money and what the local municipality is willing to do in terms of budget for paying one inspector, paying two inspectors, whatever. But
Well, obviously that's the reason. Why is that the reason? Why is that allowable to be the reason? I mean, gosh darn it, just kick it to the private sector and we will make sure that the standard is applied, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I guess the problem is if they kick it to the private sector, who's going to pay us? Is it going to be the homeowner? Is it going to be the government?
Well, and I probably shouldn't say kick to the private sector because that's technically what they're trying to do here in Tennessee. And honestly, I think it's just going to degrade the code quality even more because you'll get some rubber stampers. I mean, most certainly. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows? It's a tough situation. We got a lot of different battles we're fighting as inspectors.
Yeah, totally. And we got to do our jobs all while we're trying to fight the big battles. So that's tough.
And continue to learn new things because things are constantly changing.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I had a good time talking to you. I've learned a lot about you. I think we probably should do another one of these because there's still some questions I need to ask, but we're kind of running a little long on time here. So
yeah, we ran long on codes and codes enforcement. That was a nice rabbit hole to fall down. But yeah, we'll do this again and we'll talk more about other stuff.
Definitely. If you want to tell everybody like where they can find you on your website or social media or anything like that.
Yeah. If you want to check us out, I am on Instagram under Get Diligent. We do lots of fun educational content about houses. Would love to have you follow along, throw some comments, and get the conversation going there. Or you can check me out on YouTube under the same sort of moniker, Get Diligent or The Diligent Inspector. Trying to do more there as well. But yeah, like us, share, follow along, and let me know what you guys want to talk about.
Awesome. And I'll link those in the description. So yeah, we'll keep in touch and we'll do this again.
All right. Take care.
All right. You too. See ya.